The marble floors of Whitmore Enterprises gleamed under the morning sun, casting reflections of power and precision across the vast lobby. Every movement in that place was choreographed, heels clicked with purpose, voices murmured in corporate dialect, and suits passed one another like silent sentinels of success. So when a little black girl in a red hoodie and scuffed sneakers stepped through the front doors alone, the building seemed to pause just for a moment. Imani Carter stood barely 4 feet tall, but the determination in her gaze made her seem taller. Her backpack faded at the edges, a tiny superhero keychain dangling from the zipper hung slightly crooked over her shoulder. She walked to the front desk with calm purpose, stopping just short of the receptionist's counter. The woman behind it, a tall blonde in an impeccably tailored blazer, didn't even bother to look up. "Sweetie, you must be lost. Maintenance is downstairs." Imani didn't flinch. "I have a 9 a.m. interview with Mr. Gregory Whitmore," she said, her voice clear, firm, and surprisingly steady. "I'm here to deliver my mother's portfolio." The silence that followed was almost absurd in a place usually buzzing with motion. The receptionist, Kelsey, as her nameplate declared, slowly raised her eyes as if trying to make sense of a sentence that defied logic. Behind Imani, a few passing executives slowed their pace. A man in a gray suit even stopped pretending to check his phone. Kelsey blinked. "Interview with the CEO." "Yes," Imani said simply. "My mother, Monica Carter, is in the hospital. She's a project engineer with a dual master's in sustainability and corporate operations. She prepared for this interview for 3 months. When she got sick last night, she asked me to come in her place. She wanted Mr. Whitmore to see her work, even if she couldn't be here to present it." There was no nervousness in her tone, just a quiet conviction that came from knowing she wasn't lying. Still, Kelsey couldn't seem to decide whether to laugh or call security. Do you have a parent or guardian with you?" "I'm 8, Imani replied, pulling a neatly organized folder from her backpack. "Old enough to know when someone underestimates me." More executives were slowing down now. A cluster of young analysts lingered by the elevators. Eyes darted toward the small girl standing tall at the reception desk like a misplaced truth no one wanted to face. Then the elevator chimed. The doors slid open, revealing a tall man in a tailored navy suit. Silver-streaked hair, cold blue eyes. He stepped out like he owned the air in the room. Gregory Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, the man whose reputation was built on eliminating non-conforming employees with polite denials and perfect legal precision. To some, he was a genius. To others, a tyrant cloaked in corporate civility. "What's going on here, Kelsey?" he asked, his voice clipped, annoyed. "Why is there a child standing at my reception desk?" Kelsey stammered. "Sir, she says she has an interview with you." "For the project management role." Gregory's gaze swept down to Imani, analyzing her like a strange anomaly in a sterile lab. "And your name, Imani Carter. My mother is Monica Carter. She asked me to deliver her project proposal on cost reduction strategies for your company." Gregory tilted his head slightly. There was something odd in the way the child looked at him, like she wasn't asking for approval. Like she was measuring him. "Did she now?" he muttered, amused and mildly irritated. He extended a hand lazily. Imani placed the folder in it with quiet precision. Inside the folder was a 32-page proposal outlining operational shifts that could save the company millions annually without sacrificing quality. The numbers were tight. The logic sound. Too sound. Gregory frowned. "And your mother thought sending a child in her place was..." "What admirable, she thought competence should speak louder than prejudice?" Imani replied, her voice level. "And that intelligent people can recognize value, even if it comes in small packages." That struck a nerve. Gregory's jaw tensed just for a second, but instead of responding, he closed the folder with a decisive snap and turned toward the elevators. "Come with me," he said. And just like that, the little girl with the red backpack and sharp eyes followed one of the most powerful men in the city into an elevator bound for the top floor, while an entire lobby full of employees watched, stunned into silence, wondering who exactly had the upper hand. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss, sealing off the murmurs from the lobby. Inside, the silence stretched. Gregory stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the rising numbers above the door. Imani, meanwhile, gazed ahead calmly, as if she were riding up to a dentist appointment rather than walking into the lion's den. The air between them was thick, not with tension exactly, but with something quieter, more unnerving awareness. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance his way. She didn't try to fill the silence. And for the first time in a very long time, Gregory Whitmore felt watched. When the elevator dinged at the 40th floor, he stepped out first, expecting the girl to hesitate. She didn't. She walked beside him like she belonged there, passing awards in glass cases, portraits of founders, and the silent stares of assistants who froze at the sight of a child walking next to their CEO. Inside his office, Gregory motioned toward a leather chair across from his imposing mahogany desk. Imani climbed into it, legs swinging a few inches above the floor. Her backpack remained on her shoulders. "Let's get something straight," Gregory said, sitting down and leaning forward. "This isn't a fairy tale. I don't make decisions based on heartwarming gestures or emotional stories. What your mother did sending you here was reckless. Naive, even." "She knew the numbers wouldn't be enough," Imani replied quietly. "That's why she sent me." Gregory blinked. "Excuse me. She wanted you to meet the kind of people your hiring policies shut out. People like her. People like me." He stiffened. "My company hires based on merit." Imani tilted her head slightly. "Is that what you tell yourself?" The question hung in the air like a dropped match. Gregory opened the folder again, flipping through the pages, pretending to read what he'd already absorbed downstairs. The proposal was good too, good to ignore. A breakdown of operational redundancies, comparative cost analyses, and phased restructuring that could trim 30% off the annual overhead. He couldn't deny the intelligence behind it, but that wasn't what unnerved him. It was her. The way she sat there entirely unafraid. The way she seemed to know exactly what he would say and when he'd say it. "You think this is going to impress me?" he asked, closing the folder. "A child, a touching story, and a few decent spreadsheets?" Imani's eyes didn't flinch. "No, we expected your pride would take at least 5 minutes to show itself." Gregory leaned back slowly. His fingers drummed once against the desk. "Your mother taught you that line." "No," Imani said. "She just told me how you work, how people like you decide before they listen. She wanted to see how quickly you'd prove her right." Something shifted in him, something quiet but sharp. He'd been insulted by board members, challenged by rivals, cornered by the press, but never like this. Never by someone who had to climb into the chair across from him. "You're dangerously precocious," he said. "I've had to be." He studied her, suddenly aware that this wasn't just a clever girl parroting adult ideas. There was something far more unsettling here. Strategy, purpose. And then she unzipped her backpack again. Gregory's instinct kicked in a twitch of suspicion, but what she pulled out wasn't a toy or another folder. It was a slim, sealed envelope. She placed it gently on his desk. "What's that something my mom said you might need if the numbers weren't enough?" He picked it up slowly, breaking the seal. Inside a single printed sheet. His eyes scanned the contents and then narrowed. Internal emails, hiring reports, side memos with handwritten notes in the margins. Documents no outsider should have. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice low. "Patterns," Imani said, "of who you hire, of who you don't, and the excuses you write down to cover the reasons you can't say aloud." Gregory's hands tightened around the page. "You're bluffing," he said. "There's no way your mother got her hands on this." Imani leaned forward, her voice soft but razor-edged. "Are you sure about that?" The question wasn't a threat. It was a test. And Gregory, for the first time, realized he might already be failing it. Gregory didn't respond right away. He placed the paper down with exaggerated care, as though touching it too long might leave a stain. For a moment, he just stared at Imani, as if she might dissolve under scrutiny. But she didn't flinch. She simply waited, legs swinging gently beneath the chair, like this was any other Tuesday. "This conversation is over," he finally said, his voice flatter than he intended. "You're just a child. And whatever this stunt is, it ends here." Imani gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. "That's what she said you'd say." Gregory stood abruptly, moving toward the window behind his desk. He stared out at the skyline, as if it might offer an escape. Below him, the city buzzed taxis, weaving through traffic, people on their way to meetings, to decisions, to ambitions that no one questioned. Up here, though, he was no longer the one asking the questions, and he felt it. Behind him, he heard the soft shuffle of paper as Imani returned the document to her backpack. "I suppose you think you're clever," he muttered, still facing the glass. "Your mother, too. Gathering scraps from God knows where. Throwing a child into the lion's den. Very dramatic." Imani's voice remained calm. "We didn't come here for drama, Mr. Whitmore. We came here for accountability." He turned back to face her. "And what exactly do you think happens next? You think I'm going to hand out apologies, rewrite policies because an 8-year-old walked into my building with a folder and a smile?" She looked up at him with a gaze that felt centuries older than her age. "I think you're going to show everyone who you really are, one way or another." The room went still. Gregory opened his mouth to reply, but a soft knock at the door interrupted him. "Sir," it was his receptionist, her voice wavering slightly. "You have visitors." Gregory frowned. "I said no interruptions. They didn't make an appointment," she said. "But you might want to see this." She stepped inside, followed by a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, Mr. Alvarez, civil rights attorney, known in certain circles for being polite, thorough, and lethal in court. Gregory's stomach turned. "You have got to be kidding me." Alvarez extended a hand with professional ease. "Mr. Whitmore, I represent Ms. Monica Carter and several others whose applications were systematically dismissed. This is my office," Gregory snapped, not shaking the hand. "I'm aware," Alvarez said calmly, then turned to Imani with a warm nod. "You did well, kiddo." Gregory's eyes darted between them. "What is this? Some kind of ambush?" "No," Imani said, zipping up her backpack. "It's a mirror." Before Gregory could fire back, another knock sounded. The door opened just slightly. Angela Morris, head of HR, slipped in quietly. Behind her, 2 other black employees stood watching, saying nothing, but their presence alone said plenty. Angela's voice was steady. "Sir, I think it's time we talked." Gregory tried to dismiss the gathering with a wave of his hand, but no one moved. Alvarez set a thick folder on the desk, thicker than Imani's. It landed with a soft thud that felt deafening. "What is that?" Gregory asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "Documentation," Alvarez replied. "Emails, hiring patterns, disparity analyses, testimonies, some from your own managers, some from employees who are no longer here." Gregory's jaw clenched. Angela stepped forward. "We've kept quiet too long, sir. But not anymore. Not after today." The walls of the office, once symbols of power and control, suddenly felt like they were closing in. Gregory looked around at the faces before him. A child, a lawyer, a whistleblower, a growing crowd of witnesses. His voice cracked slightly. "You're all betraying me." "No," Angela said gently. "We're just done protecting the lie." Gregory sank back into his chair, the weight of a decade's worth of decisions beginning to settle on his shoulders. And across from him, Imani sat quietly, her face calm, her mission unchanged. The lion's den had become her courtroom, and the verdict was just beginning to unfold. For a long moment, no one said a word. The silence pressed against the walls like a rising tide. Gregory sat rigid, his fingertips digging into the leather armrests of his chair as if they were the only thing keeping him afloat. In front of him, the stack of documents Alvarez had placed on the desk loomed like a verdict already written. "You think this is how things are done?" he finally muttered, forcing a bitter laugh. "You gather a little noise, a few hurt feelings, and expect to dismantle an entire corporation." Alvarez remained unshaken. "What we expect," he said evenly, "is a response. Because either you handle this with dignity or you wait for the courts and the press to do it for you." Gregory scoffed, but his eyes flickered toward the door, as if hoping someone might walk in and rescue him from this spectacle. No one did. The room was full of people he hadn't seen coming, and the smallest among them, the child sitting quietly across from him, was still the most terrifying presence of all. Angela stepped forward, holding her tablet like a shield. "Sir, you should know. A press conference is scheduled for noon. Your name is already trending. People are asking questions about Blackstone's hiring practices, about your executive team's makeup." "That's confidential," Gregory snapped. "Not anymore," she said, and then, as if on cue, another knock. This time it wasn't cautious. The door opened with a quiet authority and Monica Carter walked in. She wore simple clothes, a hospital bracelet still around her wrist, and the pallor of someone only recently discharged. But she moved with purpose, head-high eyes locked on the man who had denied her a future without ever bothering to read her resume. Imani rose from her seat without a word, crossed the room, and took her mother's hand. The room held its breath. Gregory stood two more out of reflex than respect. "Ms. Carter, I'm here to discuss the terms of my employment," Monica said calmly, "and to bring my daughter home." Alvarez opened his briefcase again, retrieving a prepared agreement. As discussed, immediate hiring as Director of Diversity and Inclusion, salary equal to current executive standards, $200,000 in compensation to each of the 57 documented victims of discriminatory hiring. Gregory stared at the papers, then at Monica. "You planned this." "No," she said. "You created this. We just refused to be silent about it." He didn't move. A slow burn of humiliation crept up his neck. Angela cleared her throat. "Sir, the board is aware. They're watching." "And the media?" Gregory asked, though he already knew the answer. Alvarez nodded. "Channel 7, Channel 12, the Tribune, all waiting downstairs. But if you sign this, Monica will cancel the press conference. We'll settle this quietly." Imani tilted her head. "You can still be remembered as the man who made it right, or the man who had to be dragged into the light." Gregory's hand hovered above the desk. His pride screamed at him not to do it, not to give them this win. But the tide had already turned, and his name was now a weight he couldn't outrun. He signed. Alvarez took the contract and tucked it back into his case. "Good choice." Gregory turned to Monica. "You won." But Monica shook her head. "No, we just finally got seen." She looked down at Imani, who beamed up at her like the world had been reordered. And in that moment, in a room once built to intimidate, it was clear the power had shifted. The empire Gregory built on silence and sameness had been cracked open by truth and by a little girl with a backpack and a promise to keep. 3 hours later, the video of Monica Carter walking out of Whitmore Enterprises with her daughter by her side was already climbing the charts on social media. In the clip captured by a junior analyst from the second floor, Imani was smiling, clutching her mother's hand while reporters shouted questions no one bothered to answer. The message was clear without words. Something big had just changed. Up on the 40th floor, Gregory Whitmore sat alone in his office, staring at the framed photo of his first board meeting. Everyone in that picture looked like him. Same suits, same smiles, same unchecked confidence. It used to make him proud. Now it made his stomach turn. The official statement was bland. After careful review, Whitmore Enterprises has decided to implement new diversity hiring practices under the leadership of Ms. Monica Carter. But inside the building, the energy had shifted. People spoke in whispers that carried the weight of years about who had been passed over, who had stayed silent, and who might finally get a seat at the table. Gregory barely touched the untouched cup of coffee on his desk. Across the room, the phone blinked with missed calls, legal PR board members. But he didn't move. His once unchallenged authority now felt like a costume 2 sizes too big. Meanwhile, Monica sat in her new office, not yet unpacked, a mix of excitement and exhaustion in her posture. She reviewed the signed contracts with Alvarez and Angela by her side, making notes in the margins. Imani sat cross-legged in the corner, flipping through a children's business magazine, occasionally offering thoughts that made both adults raise their eyebrows. "Maybe we should set up a reporting system," she said once, without looking up. "Anonymous, so people can speak up if something feels off." Angela smiled. "You're not officially on staff, but I'll take it under advisement." Monica reached over and brushed a hand gently through Imani's curls. She always did think 5 steps ahead. That night, as news outlets dissected the story, panelists debated whether an 8-year-old should ever have had to walk into a corporate office to demand justice. But most agreed the Carters had forced a reckoning no one else could. The headlines said it all. "Little Girl, Big Revolution, How a Child Changed a Corporation." The fall of Whitmore's wall, when the smallest voice got the biggest result. For Gregory, the fallout was swift. The board voted unanimously to remove him from the CEO position. He retained an honorary title, founding chairman, but with no decision-making power. The man who once ruled with calculated silence had been dethroned by documentation, determination, and a child's unshakable calm. But it wasn't revenge that powered the movement, it was restoration. In the weeks that followed, Monica met with dozens of employees who had once felt invisible. She restructured the HR protocols, created new outreach programs, and launched an internal audit that sent shockwaves through every department. Diversity was no longer a buzzword, it was a blueprint. And at the center of it all, Imani remained a quiet force. She declined all media interviews, turned down a spot on morning talk shows, and asked only for a better library at her new school. When asked why, she shrugged and said, "We didn't do this to be famous. We did this because it wasn't fair." Her words echoed through the halls of the company long after. One afternoon, Monica and Alvarez met over lunch to discuss next steps. He lifted his glass. To justice and to the little strategist who forced the giant to blink. Monica chuckled softly. You know what the most satisfying part was? It wasn't seeing Gregory fall. It was watching Imani stand taller because of it. And she did every single day. Because even in a world built to ignore girls like her, Imani had made herself seen. And in doing so, she lit a path for others to follow. Not with noise, not with fear, but with facts, resolve, and a heart that never stopped believing her mother deserved more than silence. 6 months later, Whitmore Enterprises was nearly unrecognizable. The once sterile corporate halls now pulsed with something: new voices that had never been heard before, perspectives that had long been overlooked, and a kind of quiet pride that came from finally being seen. Productivity had surged. Employee retention was up. A national magazine named the company one of the top 10 workplaces for diversity and inclusion. But perhaps the most dramatic shift wasn't in the numbers, it was in the people. For the first time, interns of color were being mentored directly by senior leadership. Women were heading departments that had never had a female nameplate on the door. And new applicants no longer wondered if their resumes were being dismissed before they were even read. At the center of this transformation was Monica Carter. Though she still wore modest suits and carried her lunch from home, her presence carried weight. She walked the halls not as an outsider, trying to prove herself, but as a builder of culture, of trust, of something better than what came before. Her days were packed with meetings, policy reviews, and onboarding interviews. Yet she always found time to return home for dinner with Imani, who now attended a prestigious private school on a full scholarship. Still, Imani preferred to spend her afternoons in her mother's office, curled up on the window seat with a notebook, quietly scribbling down ideas that made executives pause when she read them aloud. "Have you thought about a mentorship program for high school students?" she asked one afternoon without looking up from her notes. Not everyone has a mom who knows how to fight for a job. Angela Morris, now promoted to Vice President of Human Resources, blinked. She's not wrong. Monica smiled. She rarely is. Imani had become something of a quiet legend around the company, the little girl who made the giant fall. Employees spoke of her with a mix of awe and affection. She didn't seek attention. She didn't need to. Her impact had already rippled far beyond the building's walls. Outside the company, the dominoes kept falling. Of the 57 individuals listed in Alvarez's original case, 15 had since been hired by other companies inspired by Monica's reforms. 20 used their compensation to start businesses of their own, everything from architecture firms to community-based health centers. The rest had returned to school, investing in degrees they'd once believed were out of reach. Alvarez called it a ripple effect. Monica called it justice finally moving forward instead of standing still. At one lunch meeting with a group of corporate leaders eager to replicate Whitmore's success, Monica was asked what had been the turning point. It wasn't the press, she said, or the lawsuit. It was the moment my daughter walked into that lobby with her head held high, not to ask for pity, but to demand respect. That moment made it impossible to look away. Imani, meanwhile, had already set her sights on something new. She was sketching out a program for teaching kids in underserved neighborhoods about labor rights and social equity. She wanted to help children understand their voices mattered, even when the world tried to convince them otherwise. One evening after a particularly long board meeting, Monica found her daughter asleep on the couch in her office, a notebook open beside her. Inside, in neat handwriting, was a single sentence. Change doesn't need permission, it just needs someone brave enough to start. Monica gently closed the notebook and brushed a curl from Imani's forehead. Everything they had been through, every door slammed shut, Every dismissive glance had led to this, a future rewritten not by power or privilege, but by belief. And though the battle had begun with a rejected job application and a hospital bed, it had blossomed into a revolution, one that reminded a city, a company, and a nation that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes wearing a red backpack, walking quietly through the front door because no one ever thought it belonged there, until it did. A year after that quiet revolution began the story of Imani and Monica Carter had taken root far beyond the glass towers of Whitmore Enterprises. What started as an act of desperation, a daughter carrying her mother's dreams in a backpack, had become the blueprint for something much bigger, a cultural shift that stretched across boardrooms, classrooms, and kitchen tables. Inside the company, the transformation was more than cosmetic. Employees no longer whispered in elevators or avoided uncomfortable conversations. Now there were open forums, mentorships, scholarships for employee families, and recruitment teams dedicated to reaching beyond the usual networks. Inclusion was no longer an obligation, it was the engine. Monica now sat on the company's executive board, her voice equal in weight to any of the men who had once quietly dismissed her resume, but she remained grounded. She still answered her own emails, still brought her own coffee in a thermos, and still gave Imani a kiss on the forehead each morning before school with the same whispered reminder, "You're allowed to take up space." And Imani, she was still that same wide-eyed girl with too much in her head to keep quiet. But now the world was listening. Her school had created a student advisory panel because of her. Universities had invited her to speak on youth advocacy. She even started a blog called The Smallest Voice, where she wrote about fairness, power, and what adults could learn from kids if they just stopped talking long enough to listen. She didn't write with anger. She wrote with clarity. And people listened because her words felt like mirrors. One day during a company tour for local college students, a young woman raised her hand and asked Imani, "If you could say one thing to people who feel overlooked, what would it be?" Imani didn't hesitate. "Never confuse someone else's silence for the truth," she said. "If they can't see your worth, it doesn't mean it isn't there." Afterward, Monica stood at the back of the room, watching her daughter speak to a sea of young faces, many of them who looked like she once had, unsure if they'd ever be invited to the table. A hand touched Monica's arm. It was Angela Morris now, president of operations. She smiled gently and said, "I think we underestimated the wrong person." Monica returned the smile. A lot of people did. That evening, the two of them stood by the office window as the city lights blinked to life below.